My sister thought she'd steal our $30 million family land, until Grandpa's insane will changed everything. So there I was, 32 years old, halfway through my PhD in botany, and driving my beat-up Honda Civic through the winding mountain roads of North Carolina. The Appalachians in October should have been gorgeous. All those fall colors that tourists pay good money to see. But I wasn't seeing any of it. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles looked like little white mountains themselves. Grandpa Silas was dead. The call had come 3 days ago while I was hunched over a microscope in the university lab, studying moss samples for what felt like the millionth time. When Mom's number popped up on my phone at 2 a.m., I knew something was wrong. She never called that late. Her voice was steady but hollow when she told me the news. Heart attack in his sleep. Peaceful, she said, like that made it better somehow. I hadn't been home in 2 years. Not since that disaster of Thanksgiving where Chloe, my older sister, had announced her latest real estate venture right there between the turkey and the pumpkin pie. She wanted to buy out the family land, all 847 acres of pristine Appalachian forest that had been in our family since the 1890s. Turn it into some luxury mountain resort for rich folks from Charlotte and Atlanta. Grandpa had gotten so mad his face turned the color of cranberry sauce. He slammed his fist on the table so hard the gravy boat jumped, and he told her she'd get that land over his dead body. Funny how things work out. The old homestead looked exactly the same as I remembered, except smaller somehow. That's the thing about going away and coming back. Everything shrinks. The 2-story log house my great-great-grandfather built with his own hands, the wraparound porch where Grandpa used to sit and whittle, the old barn that leaned slightly to the left like it was tired. But what caught my eye first was the brand-new Range Rover parked right in front of the house like it owned the place. Metallic silver. Probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years as a research assistant. Chloe. She must have flown in from New York the moment she heard. Probably had her assistant book the flight while she was still on the phone with Mom. That was Chloe. Always 3 steps ahead, always calculating the angles. She came out onto the porch as I was pulling my duffel bag from the trunk, and I swear she looked at my muddy hiking boots like they personally offended her. The greeting she gave me was about as warm as a January morning in the mountains. She looked me up and down, taking in my worn jeans, my University of North Carolina hoodie with the coffee stain on the sleeve, and those muddy boots she'd been eyeing. Her lips pursed slightly, that little expression she'd been perfecting since she was 10, and decided she was too good for the rest of us. She mentioned something about hoping I brought appropriate clothes to the funeral, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. The funeral was exactly what Grandpa would have hated. Chloe had somehow taken charge of the arrangements, turning it into what she probably thought was a tasteful celebration of life. There were flowers shipped in from God knows where, a catered spread that looked like it belonged to a corporate event, and a pastor who kept calling him Cyrus instead of Silas. I spent most of the service staring at a knot in the wooden pew, counting the rings like Grandpa had taught me. This tree had been about 60 years old when they cut it down, younger than Grandpa by almost 2 decades. The next morning came the will reading. Mr. Adams' office was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town lawyer, with paneling, law books that hadn't been opened in decades, and a secretary who'd probably typed the original Constitution. Chloe had brought some lawyer from New York with her, a sharp-suited shark who looked like he ate small-town attorneys for breakfast. Elam was there, too, the old hermit who'd been Grandpa's closest friend, actually wearing a clean shirt for the occasion. Then came the bombshell. Mr. Adams adjusted his glasses and read slowly, carefully, like he was defusing a bomb. The property would go to me, Leonard Samuel Cole, under one very specific condition. Within exactly 365 days from the date of death, I had to provide concrete proof of the scientific validity of Silas Cole's research into what he called the fire root. This proof had to consist of 2 things: a filed utility patent application with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and a validation report from an independent, accredited laboratory confirming the biological activity of the compound. If I failed to meet these conditions within the specified time frame, the entire property would transfer to Chloe Marie Cole. Chloe laughed when she heard it. Not a nice laugh, either. It was the kind of laugh that made you want to check your wallet was still there. She started talking about how ridiculous this was, how Grandpa had obviously lost at the end, how this fire root thing was just some old mountain folklore he'd gotten obsessed with. A year to prove the existence of a fairy tale plant? She actually used those words, fairy tale plant, like Grandpa's life work was some kind of children's story. Her face went through about 6 different colors when Mr. Adams informed her the will was ironclad. She had investors lined up, she said, contracts ready to sign, development plans already approved by the county. This delay would cost her millions, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. She wasn't worried about the delay. She was already planning how to make sure I failed. As I was leaving, she cornered me in the parking lot, tried to make me a deal. She'd make it worth my while if I just gave up now. Cut me in on the profits. I looked at her standing there in her designer outfit, with her luxury SUV and her New York lawyer, and I told her I was going to try. I had a year, and I was going to use every minute of it. The first few weeks were a deep dive into Grandpa's research. His study was like a botanical museum. Specimens, journals, maps, decades of careful observation. The fire root, according to his notes, wasn't actually a root at all. It was a parasitic plant that grew on the roots of certain trees, only under very specific conditions. It produced a compound that showed remarkable biological activity, regenerative properties, cellular repair acceleration, anti-inflammatory effects that made current drugs look like sugar pills. But there were gaps, big ones. The extraction process was only partially documented. The exact locations were encoded, and most importantly, there were no recent samples. I found a note in one of his journals. They think I'm crazy, but crazy is just another word for seeing what others can't. Leo will understand. He has the gift. I started collecting specimens on the property, but when I tried to expand my search into the adjacent state forest, I hit my first real obstacle. My permit application was denied. Turned out Chloe's lobbyists had pushed through a temporary moratorium on endemic species collection at an emergency county council meeting. She was playing hardball. That's when Elam became my lifeline, after some convincing, and proving I actually knew what I was talking about. He agreed to help, said it was his debt of honor to Silas. He showed me things Grandpa hadn't written down, places only they knew about, but he warned me that the full truth, the real secret of the fire root, was something I'd have to earn. The sabotage continued. Power got cut to the house during a critical experiment. Random inspections from various county officials. My university advisor suddenly became very concerned about my lack of focus on my official research. Chloe's hand was everywhere, but never quite visible enough to prove anything. Elam helped me set up an old generator in the barn. We turned it into a makeshift lab, running equipment that should have been in a climate-controlled university facility. Some nights I'd work by lantern light, feeling like some kind of botanical alchemist from the 1800s. During the worst of it, I found a personal letter from Grandpa hidden in a book about Cherokee plant medicine. The key line hit me hard. She can take, you can create. Never forget the difference. Below that, something that made my blood run cold. Chloe chose her path long ago. She thinks I don't know about the investors, the plans, the deals she's been making. But I know. This was my last move in a game she doesn't even know we're playing. The breakthrough came in month 3. I'd been cross-referencing Grandpa's chemical analysis with Cherokee legends that Elam remembered. Something about a plant that only showed its true nature under the blood moon of falling leaves. I realized the compound was only produced during a specific window, the November full moon, when temperature and humidity conditions were exactly right. But there was more to it. The extraction had to happen immediately, within hours of harvesting, and required a stabilizing agent from another rare local plant, a moss that I'd actually been studying for my PhD. Suddenly, my useless academic research became the key to everything. The week of the November full moon, Elam and I went out every night. We followed Grandpa's encoded maps, looked for the signs he'd documented. On the 4th night, in a grove of ancient oaks that had never been logged, we found them. Small, unprepossessing plants growing on the roots of the oldest trees, barely visible unless you knew exactly what to look for. The extraction process was delicate. 1 degree too hot, and the compound would denature. Too much pressure and it would oxidize. But Grandpa's notes, combined with my knowledge of the stabilizing moss, got us there. At 3 a.m. in a barn lit by generator power, I watched a solution in a flask begin to emit a soft, warm light. Bioluminescence at exactly 585 nanometers, just as Grandpa had documented. I sent samples to 3 independent labs, paying for a rush analysis with money I couldn't afford to spend. While waiting for results, I worked on the patent application. The prior art search alone took 2 weeks. The claims had to be specific enough to be defensible, but broad enough to have value. Richard Harrison from Harrison Biotech Ventures kept calling, each offer higher than the last. Other companies started sniffing around, too. Someone broke into the barn one night. Though they didn't find anything, I'd started keeping the real samples in Elam's root cellar. The lab results came back 2 weeks before the deadline. The compound showed significant regenerative activity in vitro, anti-inflammatory markers that were off the charts, potential applications in everything from wound healing to neurodegenerative diseases. It was real. It was all real. I filed the patent application with 3 days to spare, overnighting it to the USPTO with more tracking numbers than a government secrets package. The confirmation came back the morning before the deadline. Application received, filing date confirmed. The final meeting in Mr. Adams' office felt like a showdown in an old Western. Chloe arrived with not 1 but 3 lawyers. Harrison was there too, having somehow inserted himself into the proceedings as Chloe's potential business partner. They were confident, already discussing development timelines. I placed 2 folders on Mr. Adams' desk. The patent application receipt from a USPTO and the validation reports from 3 independent laboratories. Mr. Adams examined them carefully, then looked up at the room. His voice was steady as he spoke. The conditions of the will have been met. Mr. Cole has provided both a filed utility patent application and laboratory validation of the compound's biological activity. Chloe's composure cracked. She accused me of faking the results, of bribing the labs, of a dozen different schemes. But Mr. Adams had done his due diligence. Everything was verified, notarized, legally bulletproof. Harrison picked up the lab reports, reading them with the intensity of a man who'd built an empire on recognizing opportunity. His expression shifted from skepticism to interest to something approaching excitement. He looked at Chloe, then at me, then back at the reports. The patent application alone changes everything, he said slowly. This isn't speculative anymore. It's proven science with immediate commercial applications. He turned to Chloe with the kind of look that could freeze water. You offer me a real estate development with standard returns. Your brother has intellectual property with revolutionary potential. My investment goes where the science leads. That's when I slid the 3rd document across the table, a letter of intent from a major biotech firm, offering to fund further research while preserving the sustainable harvesting methods Grandpa had developed. The room went silent. Mr. Adams signed the deed transfer with a fountain pen that was probably older than me. The property was mine, free and clear, all 847 acres of it. But here's where I surprised everyone, including myself. I didn't sell the patent to Harrison or anyone else. Instead, I structured a different kind of deal. Working with a team of IP lawyers from the university, we used a filed patent as the primary asset to attract early-stage venture capital. The patent application, combined with the lab results and the letter of intent, was enough to secure initial funding through a convertible note structure. Within 6 months, the Silas Cole Botanical Research Institute was operational. We negotiated an exclusive licensing agreement with a pharmaceutical company that included substantial upfront payments, milestone payments tied to clinical trials, and royalty guarantees that would fund the institute for generations. The key stipulation: all harvesting had to follow sustainable practices documented in Grandpa's research. The SBIR grants came next, then National Science Foundation funding. Conservation groups contributed once they understood we were creating a new model for preserving biodiversity while generating economic value. Chloe disappeared back to New York the day after the deed transfer. Her Range Rover never appeared in our driveway again. I heard through the family grapevine that she'd had to restructure her entire business model, lost some major investors who'd been counting on the mountain resort project. About a year later, Dad called. We hadn't talked much since the whole thing went down. He'd been Team Chloe from the start, convinced she was a successful one while I was just wasting time with plants. But something had changed in his voice. He admitted he'd been wrong about my plant thing, said he was proud of what I'd built. It was the closest to an apology I'd ever gotten from him. The fire root is now in phase 2 clinical trials. The compound we discovered has applications that even Grandpa hadn't imagined. Wound healing that works in days instead of weeks. Anti-inflammatory properties that could revolutionize arthritis treatment. Even potential applications in slowing cellular aging. Elam lived to see the first published paper with his name on it as co-author. He passed last winter, peacefully in his cabin with a view of the mountains he loved. We scattered his ashes in the grove where we'd found the first fire root. That spring, the plants there bloomed more abundantly than ever. 5 years have passed since that day in Mr. Adams' office. The Institute employs 30 people now, mostly locals who know these mountains in their bones. We've documented 17 new species, filed 3 more patents, published 12 peer-reviewed papers. Each discovery builds on Grandpa's foundation, proving that traditional knowledge and modern science can strengthen each other. The old house has been restored, turned into a visitor center, where school kids come to learn about Appalachian botanical heritage. Grandpa's study is preserved exactly as he left it, complete with that world's okayest botanist mug I'd given him years ago. Students come from around the world now to study at the Institute. They arrive thinking they'll learn about botanical extraction techniques and leave understanding something deeper, that the mountains teach patience, that every seed knows to wait for the right conditions, that true discovery comes from listening rather than taking. Sometimes I walk through the forest at dawn, the way Grandpa used to. The fire root still grows in its secret places, still glows with that soft amber light when conditions are perfect. We harvest it carefully, sustainably, the way the Cherokee did, the way Grandpa did. We've learned to synthesize the compound too, but we keep the wild population strong. Balance. Always balance. The patent expires in 15 years. We've already decided not to renew it. By then, the synthesis process will be public domain, available to anyone who wants to produce the compound. The board members think I'm crazy, but Grandpa's notes were clear. Knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted. Standing on the porch this morning, coffee in hand, I watched the sun paint the mountains gold. A group of PhD students were heading out with our field researchers to document winter bark characteristics. The lab was humming with activity. 3 new compounds were being analyzed. The scratch on the porch railing was still there, the one I'd made with my pocket knife when I was 8 and Grandpa had taught me to whittle. It had been varnished over now, preserved like everything else worth keeping. But unlike a museum piece, it was still part of a living, working place. Harrison still sends offers occasionally. The latest one had so many zeros, it made my head spin. But he knows my answer by now. Some things aren't for sale. Some things are meant to be tended, not consumed. Looking back, I realized that what was Grandpa's final lesson. The fire root was a test, but the true inheritance was understanding the difference between price and value, a lesson Chloe, with her spreadsheets and profit margins, never learned. She saw a commodity where Grandpa saw a community. She saw real estate where he saw a responsibility. We're not owners here, but caretakers. Every Cole who understood this thrived. Everyone who forgot it fell. That's the real legacy. The understanding that we borrow this land from our children, and our job is simply to become worthy of that trust. The mountains taught me that. Grandpa taught me that. Even the fire root itself, glowing in the darkness, teaches that it only thrives when it shares resources with its host tree, when it gives as much as it takes. The story made the news eventually. Local botanist saves family land with miracle plant discovery. They got most of it wrong, of course. May it sound like luck instead of 30 years of Grandpa's careful research combined with a grandson who finally understood that sometimes knowing moss is exactly what you need to save a mountain. But one reporter got it right. She wrote about the long game, about how Silas Cole had spent decades preparing for a future he wouldn't see, trusting that someone would continue to work. She interviewed the Institute staff, who told her that the real miracle wasn't the fire root. It was that anyone still cared enough to look for it. There's a photo on my desk from last year's graduation ceremony. 32 new botanical researchers, trained in both traditional and modern methods, ready to go out and find their own fire roots. In the photo, I'm standing where Grandpa would have stood, wearing his old field jacket that Mom saved for me. Each graduate holds a vial of fire root extract, the culmination of their year-long research projects. That's the real triumph. Not the building or the patents or the bank accounts, but the people, the ones who'll keep searching after I'm gone, who'll protect these mountains when I can't, who'll find wonders Grandpa and I never imagined. The Institute's mission statement, carved into a piece of black walnut from a tree that fell naturally on the property, reads, "To bridge the wisdom of the past with the knowledge of the future, preserving both for generations yet to come." Grandpa wrote those words 40 years ago, long before he knew if anyone would be there to read them. Every morning, I check the weather, the soil moisture, the phenological signs that Grandpa taught me to read. The mountains speak if you know how to listen. They tell you when the ginseng is ready, when the mushrooms will fruit, when the fire root will glow. The work continues because the work must continue. Climate change is shifting the growing zones. Development pressure never stops. Every month, another botanical secret is lost to a parking lot somewhere. But we're fighting back, one discovery at a time, one preserved acre at a time, one trained mind at a time. The fire root extract is in hospitals now, healing wounds that wouldn't heal before, fighting inflammation that resisted everything else. Each vial that helps someone is a vindication of Grandpa's obsession, proof that crazy is sometimes just another word for seeing what others can't. Somewhere out there, maybe in New York, maybe somewhere else entirely, Chloe is living her life, making her deals, building her empire. I hope she's happy. I really do. But I also know that she'll never understand what she lost when she saw our grandfather's legacy as real estate instead of responsibility. The clock that started ticking that day in Mr. Adams' office never really stopped. It just started measuring something different. Not days until deadline, but days of discovery. Not time running out, but time being used. Not a race against my sister, but a relay race across generations, each runner carrying the flame a little further. The fire root glows in the darkness, a small light in vast shadows. But small lights are how you fight the dark. One glowing root, one preserved acre, one trained mind at a time, until the darkness retreats, until the mountains are safe, until the dance between old and new becomes so natural that no one remembers there was ever a conflict. That's the real legacy of the fire root. Not the compound, not the patents, not the money, but the proof that sometimes, if you're patient enough, careful enough, and stubborn enough, you can turn a grandfather's crazy dream into a light that never goes out. Standing here on this porch, looking out at mountains that have stood for millions of years and will stand for millions more, I understand what Grandpa knew all along. The fire root was never the destination. It was a vehicle that brought me home, taught me who I was meant to be, and showed me that sometimes the greatest inheritance is the chance to become worthy of it.